genetic predisposition and childhood experiences make us 10 to 12 times more likely to become an addict than if we don't have those. That was my story. I had both of those. And so, had I never taken a drink or used a drug, which I started to in college, I never would have become an addict. And that's the case with anybody. If you don't try them, you're not going to become addicted. Well, if you're set up for it and then you try them, the odds of you becoming an addict are really high, especially if you start early on before your mid-20s.
This is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. Welcoming to Pain's Don't Hide the Scars podcast, George Haymaker III, a certified transformational neuroscience coach. Thanks for sitting down with me today, George.
Hey, Jason. Great to see you. Great to be here. Hello, everyone.
George, you're one of those people what really, in addition to being fascinated by the brain, my sobriety, if I could put it into one quote, it'd be Walt Whitman, be curious, not judgmental. And so when I see, a moniker, into the neuroscience and you're doing some amazing work with people, but also have had some substance issues as well. I'm just curious, when did that kind of spark for you that you wanted to get down this road or this avenue of really understanding the brain and not only helping people that are transforming their lives coming out of addiction, but I mean, you work with organizations, HR departments. I mean, just fascinating work.
Yeah, well, actually, it all started as a result of my history in addiction.
Mm.
I've been in recovery 12 years, and I hit a bottom from pain pills and alcohol at the age of 52 and found myself in rehab, actually a few different times over a 6-month period. And, that's quite a moment in time when you're 52 and, taking 50 pain pills a day and drinking 2 bottles of vodka, and you're just a wreck. And you've scared away everyone in your life, and you're sitting in rehab wondering how the hell you got there.
Yeah.
And, what was next? And was there anything next? And, is this the way I wanted to go out of the world? And is this what I wanted to be known for? Was this the only meaning that I was going to have in my life? And I just had to have a hard conversation with myself, and I summoned the wherewithal to give it another try. And so that landed me in recovery. I started out in 12-step AA, and that was life-saving. Formed a really good foundation and basis for my recovery. Having said that, I'm a kind of guy that really wants to understand the where's, the how's, the what's, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't getting all the answers I wanted from AA. It was keeping me on the straight and narrow, but I really wanted to understand like what had happened to my brain, and what was, how was my brain going to change, or could it? I just had always been interested in science. So I started reading a bunch of books on, started off in addiction psychology and spirituality, because obviously 12 steps based on spirituality. So I explored more there and led me into psychology of, the mind and the addicted mind. And that led me into neuroscience, because what it is that, everything really comes back to the brain at one point or another. All of these unhelpful patterns, the addictive patterns that we alcoholics and addicts find ourselves in, have imprinted themselves in the brain neurologically. There's 85 billion neurons in the brain, and they all map themselves out according to how we're living our lives and forming patterns. And so, I just became fascinated with that, and then come to find out that the brain is forgiving. It, through a process called neuroplasticity, it allows us to change, adapt, and evolve these patterns in our brain. The neurons can actually move around and shift around if we start leading a different, more intentional life. And so as we practice new ways of being, new ways of thinking, feeling, acting, our neurons actually start to move around. And so this just became super fascinating to me. And I reached a point in my life where, I'm now 64, and I, as with a lot of older people, they want to start giving back, and they find that, helping others is really an important calling. And that was the case for me. I came out of another business, and I just was trying to decide what to do. And I had done so much learning in this area that becoming addicted was the most influential, important moment of my life.
Mhm.
And so I said, why would I ever want to keep this to myself? Why shouldn't I just share it with people and everything else I've learned about recovering from a neurological perspective? And so that's what led me to this place. And I've
Yeah.
taken a bunch of coursework on neuroscience and, certifications in coaching and neuroscience. And so here I am, trying to help people with change, whether it's, out of addiction patterns or any type of change. The people can still change even if they're not addicted, right? They could have
Right.
unhelpful mental patterns that maybe lead them to addiction, but there's a whole bunch of people out there that aren't addicts and alcoholics that still have unhelpful mental patterns. And so all of those things can be neurologically changed in the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I wanted to start this program because many months ago I was dealing with some veterans. I just didn't like the way they were being treated. I didn't like the services that were being provided, for the lack of a better term. I think we need to do a better job with our veterans, and in essence, that's why I decided to start this. My biggest concern with veterans and substance use, especially with opioids, is that they're not getting the proper treatment. And it seems like for years they have not received the proper treatment for that. We decided to make sure that our veterans are going to be able to get the services they need in order to combat their addiction.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com. I'm really fascinated, by your story about later in life, as far as the prescription medication. Was that something that came about because of, we've heard it so many times of an injury, and then you get prescribed, and then there you go? Or was the patterns of addiction and substance abuse kind of set forth early on in life? I mean, I grew up in a home of it, so and a lineage of it, so uh, it's unfortunate. Well, no, I mean, I'm grateful for it. Like you, that really landed with me when you said, like, the best thing that happened to me. And a lot of people think I'm nuts when I say that, and it's like, well, you're not in recovery, you don't get it.
Yeah.
When we get it, it becomes a gift when we really change the way we think about it.
Yeah.
So for you, what was kind of the histrionics?
Yeah. So like you, I have a lot of family history of it. And the way that that works neurologically is there's two things that can really catalyze addiction, um, from an early on age. One is genetic predisposition, and that happens when, we have family members that are suffering from the disease. And we have genetic code in us that makes us predisposed to addiction if it gets triggered. That's number one. And our reward systems are kind of built differently. We don't experience reward normally the way that normal people do. Our circuits don't work right. And so we don't get reward as easily from normal life pleasures. And so we're constantly seeking reward in other ways because we're not getting it through as much as other people are through normal life pleasures. And I could go into the weeds on that, but I won't. The second thing is adverse childhood experiences. So, we meet a lot of people in the rooms that, have these stories that, they come from homes that are difficult. dysfunctional, unpleasant, whatever it might be, and they had to figure out a way to survive in those environments. And the problem is that those situations, those experiences have neurological impacts on our brain. They cause, malfunctioning of the brain. Child's brains aren't fully developed, so these adverse experiences, go straight into our brain and get imprinted. And we're left trying to figure out how to deal with these things because we have no experience with them. We're just trying to survive, right? And all we're meant to do as children is get unconditional love and support and just kind of be helped into this world and trained like how to deal with it. But if we come out of the gates and the chutes, experiencing adverse experiences like, significant physical abuse or, God forbid, sexual abuse or arguing or fighting in the home or divorce and other addiction, we all know the deal. That really has a negative effect on it. And those adverse experiences can actually trigger those genes of addiction and make them full blown and full bloom.
Right.
And so those two things, genetic predisposition and childhood experiences, make us 10 to 12 times more likely to become an addict than if we don't have those.
Wow.
Okay. And so that was my story. I had both of those. And so, had I never taken a drink or used a drug, which I started to in college, I never would have become an addict. And that's the case with anybody. If you don't try them, you're not going to become addicted. Well, if you're set up for it and then you try them, the odds of you becoming an addict are really high, especially if you start early on before your mid-20s. Where certain parts of your brain haven't fully developed, you're more likely to have addiction become a pattern. And so that's what, happened to me as I, started coping with all this unhelpful mental thinking and feeling due to my upbringing. I was anxious, I was full of self-doubt, low self-esteem, got angry quickly, really reactive emotionally, like I would just go off. And it was all a result of these early experiences that I had had.
Right.
And so, I started doing cocaine and alcohol in college and pot. I'd pretty much do anything. And I just noticed I felt better. And so that's kind of the way I coped for the next 30 years was through mixing of different substances. I didn't try opiates until my 40s when I started having surgeries. And you're right. I tried them and I was mixing with alcohol and the buzz was just fabulous. In my, at that time. And so it just really relaxed me and chilled me out. But the problem is, even though you're trading in and out of substances, you're not starting over again. You're just piling on what's already developed at that point in terms of addiction and how it works in the brain. So I was out of control and it just progressed rapidly. And at some point in my 40s, it got so bad, I just was no longer compulsive. I couldn't choose when I used. It was impulsive. I was just using to feel normal, to stop withdrawing. And that's when I knew I was in bad shape, and it just kept going until I finally realized that was the end of the maze, and I had to pay the piper and come clean.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, George. I know that's going to resonate with a lot of people, and definitely many parts of it for me do. And from your knowledgeable background, I want your take on this, and please punch holes in it. But it makes more sense to me more and more especially with what you shared, because my understanding of the brain, it wants to protect this vessel that it's in, and when we get certain chemicals, especially those where we can get them externally, we're not having to earn them. It makes sense to me that when you've been in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, especially as you were saying, adverse childhood. I did a program that helped me that was all about adverse childhood and uncovering stuff in my recovery. And so it makes sense to me how people can quickly get stuck into that loop because of the way our reward system works, the way that maybe because of the constant fight, flight, or freeze mode that we're in as a kid, or I don't know. I didn't know I had anxiety until I got sober. I was like, what is this thing? Doctor's like, you have anxiety. What the hell? Oh, wait, I've had that since I was like 6. Um, so it makes sense that I would get stuck in that loop. The brain, it's almost like it's saying, oh, well, you've got all these chemicals, you're safe. When in reality, we're anything but when we're imbibing all these things, but we're
Yeah.
getting, the reward system's so jacked up that the communication throughout the brain, it's not working properly. Like we literally, our brain is just not working the way it's made to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the way the reward system works is that, and you're right, the brain's number one job is to protect us and make sure that we survive and we're safe. And so it's constantly looking for threats through our senses, trying to detect what's out there and is there anything that's going to threaten our livelihood. And it's also, to run all of our systems in our body to make sure that everything's working right and signaling right so that, we live another day. So that's really the brain's number one job. And so when we were created, we were given reward, feel-good chemicals, neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and so on, for natural life pleasures. So things like having sex, that's why orgasms feel good because, if they didn't feel good, then we wouldn't want to have them, and then we wouldn't have sex, and then we wouldn't be able to procreate and continue the species. So all of these feel-good chemicals are all about us trying to survive so that we could have babies and continue the species. That's really what this evolution is and the way our brains were constructed and wired. And so that's why we feel good when we eat. Good meals taste good because if we didn't eat, we wouldn't live. Drinking water tastes good and feels good because if we didn't drink water, we would die of thirst. And grouping together in social environments feels good, and engaging with people and friends and loved ones because when the cavemen, when we were created, and we had to band together in groups in order to protect each other because there were large enemies out there like dinosaurs that were going to eat us if we didn't band together. And so we were given this wiring that said, okay, you're going to feel good when you group together. Okay, so we have a normal homeostasis level of feel good that's around 50 nanomoles. That's the level of dopamine that we have in our system just to, want to live and get up every day and do our lives. And then when we have a great meal or have sex, that dopamine level might rise twice that level. So it might spike from 50 to 100, okay? And then it kind of just eases back down gradually. When you do a drug, when you do meth, you get a dopamine surge of 1,000. So you get 10 times the amount of dopamine that you get from the best orgasm that you've ever had.
Wow.
And so, cocaine is 3 times, and, alcohol is 4 times, and, so on and so forth. All of these external substances and actually behaviors, gambling, shopping, porn, etc., they all act the same way. They all give us these artificially high, externally induced dopamine hits that are far more than the brain was ever designed to receive. And so what happens is it's like trying to run 1,000 gallons of water through a little garden hose all at once. It's not meant for that. And so, if you were to take 1,000 gallons of water like a fire hose and try to water a little plant, you'd blow the plant out. And that's what happens in our brain with our neurons, is that we're firing so much dopamine through our neurons into the other neurons that it just can't handle it. And they start to close down, malfunction, and the whole reward network gets screwed up. And so what happens is then that is over time, we keep wanting to do more and more drug and alcohol because the neurons are not able to produce and receive as much dopamine as they were because they're starting to shut down. So that's tolerance. That's why we have to keep doing more and more in order to get, we're trying to get more dopamine to land in the neural pathway so that we can feel like how we used to feel. And that is why the subsequent addiction, the more and more you do it, never feels as good as it first does, because these neural pathways are beginning to malfunction and shut down. They don't work as well. And so that's what this chasing is all about. This addictive pattern is that we're trying to get more dopamine to register, and it's not, because our brain networks are getting damaged.
Right.
And also it's causing damage to our frontal part of our brain, which is the thinking, impulse control, evaluation part of our brain. And I'm sure all addicts can relate that, when we're in a height of our addiction, we're not getting a lot of thought, a lot of impulse control, and a lot of anything else. And that's because that region is being damaged by the influx of those chemicals, by the stress related to it all. We're just so activated all the time in search of our substance. So, that's what addiction looks like neurologically in the brain, and that's why it's so evil, and why the only recourse is to stop using them, to allow that whole reward network in your brain to reset itself. And over time, what will happen is that while, as we all know who've been through it, the first 90 days are not comfortable. What happens is these pathways that represent the addiction begin to get quiet, because we're no longer using the drugs and alcohol, no longer firing dopamine through them. They begin to reset and go quiet while we're pursuing other activities that are healthier, and we're starting to run dopamine through those. And so that's what, the neurological change process looks like in recovery. My metaphor for it is, addiction looks like an old gnarly oak tree that has these big gnarly roots that are beginning to lift up the patio and the road, because they're causing consequences. And they're so gnarly, these roots, which are actually the neural pathways in your brain, the connections of neurons. And they've gotten that way because we've just used these patterns over and over again with the drugs and alcohol. And we're so emotionally invested in it. It's like water and fertilizer that we keep pouring on these roots. And that's why they get so big and gnarly. Well, when you stop using the drugs and the alcohol, we're no longer watering and fertilizing the roots, and they begin to weaken and go dormant. Meanwhile, we're building a life in recovery. We're over here on the other side of our property, and we planted a little sapling that represents our new life. And now we're going to start to water and fertilize that by thinking, feeling, and acting differently, as a new version of ourselves, as a new identity for ourselves. And as we practice that way of living with healthier pursuits, and we're reactivating our natural reward system, starting to enjoy sex again and eating again and all the rest, this little sapling, because we're watering and fertilizing it through repetition, it's beginning to take root. And those roots are little by little starting to get stronger, and that sapling starts to grow. And if you stay with recovery long enough, as we know, that's why like the first year is so important, right? That sapling starts to get, decent size. And now it can begin to start to live on its own, and self-sustained, without us having to water and fertilize it maybe every day. All these activities that we're doing now are now habitual in our mind. They actually move to the part of our brain that's habitual. It's in the back part of our brain. It's where riding the bike is. It's where speaking the English language is. It's where all these automatic habits are. And we just start to live that way automatically, but we have to keep doing it, so that we keep growing this tree.
Yeah.
I hope that analogy, helps make sense of it.
Oh, it makes perfect sense for me. I mean, but I'm visual. It's painted a good picture. And I'm sure it did for the listener too, George. And you said something in there that makes me want to ask, I am going to ask about, as our prefrontal cortex and doesn't everything in the brain doesn't come to maturation till about 25, 26, but what about for the individual that maybe starts using in adolescence phase and it comes through, we've Flint and I here at Payne will tell people, understand your loved one. It's going to take some time. This substance has cut their maturity rate, and we don't just mean that they're like, oh, I'm going to just sit on the floor and eat, Fruit Loops. We're not talking about. We're just talking about the processes and the a conscious way of thinking. All these things have been cut. What kind of differentiation, at least from your knowledge, is that when it's an adolescent as opposed to somebody that's maybe, in their 30s and up, as far as this process of new neural pathways coming online? Is there really a difference?
Well, just one minor thought on what you said. There are parts of the brain that do fully develop earlier than mid-20s.
Mm,
It's the front part of the brain, the frontal cortex, the thinking, decision making, the part that makes us human and so much more intelligent than every other mammal. That part doesn't stop developing until the mid-20s.
okay.
And so that's why young people are more susceptible to addiction, is because that front part of their brain, which is responsible for evaluating consequences, impulse control, making good decisions, is not fully developed. And so these two parts of the brain are supposed to talk to each other and have a check and balance, like the like the branches in government. So the front part of the brain is supposed to tell the reward part of the brain, hey, dude, that's not a great idea because we're going to wake up tomorrow and feel like hell. And, it's going to have these consequences. So if you start young, you're not really operating from a full deck with all parts of the brain fully developed. As far as, yeah, so if you start using early, the development of that front part of the brain, because damage is caused by these chemicals with addiction, yeah, it won't develop fully or develop correctly. Um, so that's a problem. Now, again, the great thing about the brain is it is forgiving, like the liver, as long as we don't like completely decapacitate ourselves.
Right.
But it is forgiving, and new neurons can grow, new pathways can form. Um, so there may be more uh, redevelopment that has to occur if a person uses early on as far as the brain structures. But even somebody that starts using later in life, their front part of their brain may have been developed, but they've still laid in these neural pathways, these patterns of addiction that have to be weakened and replaced by new patterns. And so either way, you're having to develop new ways of being, new patterns, new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting in order for new pathways to form, your brain to reorganize itself in a healthier way. Um, so there's work to be done no matter when you start using.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the things that you might work with if a client comes in, maybe different than an organization, but an individual in really starting that process? I know for me, one of the things, and I didn't believe it, was writing out gratitude. I'm like, well, okay, how's this going to change? And it took a while, but eventually, I lived with a lot of victim mentality. Eventually, that really went away to a point now where where sometimes it makes it even a challenge for me. I'm like, oh no, I actually was being treated terribly there. And not that it's like a victimizing state, but it's like I didn't set a good boundary or limit my accessibility to this individual. But, a thing like that, as simple as writing out gratitude every day, I didn't believe that it was going to change anything, but it did. Like it not only changed the way I thought, thus my actions around so many different things.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. How
Mm.
many gratitude lists did you write out, and how long did you do it before you kind of woke up one day and said, I feel different?
I think it was a good at least 2.5, 3 months.
Okay. Amazing that you gave that time frame, because 90 days is kind of the time frame of when new patterns develop,
Huh.
um, new neural pathways get, substantially developed if you are practicing something regularly. So the way the brain works is through repetition. Remember the days when you would study, and there were two different ways to study. One is you could cram the night before and not study any time before then.
Hand up.
And how well did you do on the test when you crammed?
I was a B student through luck and I guess natural intellect, but yeah, never that great. No.
Okay. The other option was to study a little bit every day and do it over and over again. And by the time you got to the test, you felt a lot more prepared and you didn't have to cram. And it's more likely you did better. Okay. The reason for that is because the brain learns best by learning through repetition, multiple different times over time, in different ways. So it likes to learn by reading, it likes to learn by writing, it likes to learn by visualizing. And the more different ways that you can learn the same information, the more times, the more steadily you do it over days, weeks, and months, the more basically you are forming a neural pathway in your brain that gets connected by glue, or neurotransmitters. And these neurons start to form that represent whatever it is that you're learning. And so, to take your example of a gratitude list, you shifted your thinking about your upbringing, by not by you had a pattern, a neural pathway that had been developed around victimhood, but you reconstructed your version of that into gratitude. And so you thought through doing this list day after day after day, a different way than you had been, which caused a whole new neural pathway to form. And you did it long enough that it became a habit. And you also, while you were doing it, I guarantee you that you felt good about it. You had emotional attachment to it. Emotion is like fertilizer. When you attach emotion to thinking and acting in a certain way, and you mix them all up together, so you have an emotional, thoughtful action, okay, you are creating a pathway that is really strong. And so when you wrote your list, you had an action you were writing, you were thinking about the list, you were thinking good things when you did the list, and you had positive emotion when you did the list. And so you developed a really strong neural pathway and you kept watering and fertilizing it for 90 days, which is about the time when, if you're doing something regularly, it is going to become cemented in your brain, and it begins to move out of I have to think about this, work at it, to I can't imagine not doing it. Like, this is a part of my life now. And it becomes so important to you because you're getting reward from it. That's the other thing the brain loves, is reward. If you can start experiencing reward from these new activities you're doing in recovery, the brain likes it. Obviously the brain likes reward. Otherwise it wouldn't want those drugs and alcohol, right? So we know that the brain loves to feel good. It loves these neurochemicals, but we ran the course on the addiction. That's no bueno anymore. We've completely screwed up our brain and developed these patterns. We have to move away from it to save our lives. And trust me, that's not a life. That old life is not a life worth saving anyway. So let's go try a new life, reset our reward pattern, allow the brain to experience reward from things like gratitude lists, helping others, loving others, being kind, exercising, playing, having animals. I can go on and on about that. But create a program of life for yourself that's meaningful and has reward. And you do that often enough, for 90 days, 6 months, a year, that sapling that becomes a small tree, and you're just watering it every day, fertilizing it with this positive energy, this positive emotion, positive thinking, positive actions. And you just have to stay with it. And pretty soon you don't even miss the old life. And this is so rewarding. Your brain loves it. Your brain stops thinking about the old stuff, and it likes where it is. It knows that you're safer there. It likes safe. It wants to protect you. It now recognizes that old way was about to kill you, and it wants to keep you here now. So,
Yeah.
but it just takes long enough uh, with practice, positive emotion and thought in order to ingrain these things, develop these neural pathways. Our neurons begin to shift, our brain starts to look different. It starts to map out as a brain in recovery, not a brain in addiction.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, George. Wow. How did that play out for you in your life and in your recovery? What were maybe, do you recollect some of the things when you started your journey that you really dug into? Or I'm a proponent, and it because it worked for me. I had a gentleman, one of my first sponsor. He was like, "What did you like as a kid?" And luckily, well, we landed on Lego. Not that it's cheap, but it was the cheapest of the things I threw out there, and definitely much cheaper than my alcohol habit and addiction. Um, but it was just like that getting back to that simple tinkering and those innocent, pure joys of things. Um, that was huge for me. And plus it was, something with my hands. I felt like I was completing a task. What for you maybe was in that first 90 days, if you recall?
Well, I was in rehab
Oh,
for,
so you got a 3 months in?
well, as I told you, I was in three different rehabs in
Mm,
6 months, but the problem was I wasn't in long enough the first two times. I was only in 2 or 3 weeks thinking I could figure it out. And,
right.
I was so far off that, so I eventually went to a different one for 60 days at the end. So that's what I needed. But yeah, so what I like a really structured life. I still do. I like to put myself, I liken it to the Clydesdale horses that have the blinders on, right? I like to live my life in a really narrow band of not getting too high, not getting too low. Because the lows were so low for me that I don't want any part of those anymore. And really, what I focus on now is not on pleasure. I focus on well-being and
Hmm.
on feeling good as a from the soul and the heart outward. I don't worry about like pleasure in my brain. Like these short hits of dopamine just don't mean anything to me anymore. I buy a beat up van. I don't need anything material. None of that means anything more to me. It just turns me off now. And so I really just try to do things that deliver this sense of uh, this wellness that rises up within you from the heart and the soul that gives you goosebumps. So, really just, like helping people. I did a lot of service. I have a couple of dogs that I don't know how I'd make it in recovery without them. They teach me so much more than I teach them. They show me how to be present. They unconditional love. Nothing seems to bother them. They don't remember yesterday. They're not worried about tomorrow. They're just a model for me as to how I should live my life. Um, and I'm super focused on my nutrition. I eat really well. I get great pleasure out of being healthy. I work out every day. Um, I sleep well. I really focus on. Um, I look at sleep as a gift, as a time when I can be peaceful and calm, when there's no stress. So really, I pursue a life of like tranquility and peace and serenity when I just can operate in this nice little area and I just add things to that. I garden a lot. And so your sponsor was right to ask you things that you like that give you this sense of goodness and wellness. And that's what everyone should do is just make a list of all the things that they like that aren't, going to harm them,
Yeah.
and start building a life around them and stay in that lane for a while and then start adding little things to it as you experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I hadn't thought about it till you were sharing there. Like, I mean, you can see some of the Lego sets, but I got them all around in my office here, between race cars and Star Wars stuff. Um, and I was like, wow, I hadn't really thought about it. It was such an instant thought when you were sharing is that my joy of it is that building process. Not that, ooh, I want to get it done. It's like, yeah, when they're done, it's cool. They're a nice display. If some kids come over and wanted to play, I don't care, whatever. Have a good time. it's that joy of that process. And that is one of the big transformational shifts for me in my thinking too, and being able to recognize I enjoy the process of things. It's no longer a situation of the dangling carrot with the, the jackass trying to get up the hill. There is no carrot. There's just a stick now. It's just the walk. It's just the process. It's embracing the unknown. I don't know what tomorrow is. I mean, like when you and I connected, I was like, wow, this guy's doing cool things. We didn't know how this was going to turn out, but I was like, yeah, we need to have this conversation. It's going to bring value to other people. And I think it's just like that. It's that process, and that gift. I'm here with you. That's it. Right
You
now,
know,
in this moment, sharing this conversation with you, that's what I get. The past was knowledge and occurrences that led up to this conversation and where it goes, how it goes from here. I don't know, but I get to enjoy this with you.
that and I don't know how long it took you to get there, but that is what you just said is one of the most important foundational transformational parts of recovery.
Hmm.
Because when we're in addiction, it is all about gimme, 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 gimme that thing. So I can feel better, so I can get this hit of pleasure. Recovery is completely opposite to that. It is a never-ending pursuit, and this is how I defined it, a never-ending pursuit of being the best version of yourself. It is the process. It is a path that we get on, and that's why I mentioned blinders, is because I never want to get off the path. The path is not always smooth. It might have a bump or two in it. That's life, but we just stay on the path, and it's this path that leads somewhere. We're never going to get there, but we're just in this continual, endless, day by day pursuit of just being a little better and a little better to ourselves and a little better to the world around us and those that are in our lives. And that, I mean, that is not just something we say, it's something that you feel. And if you feel it, and if you actually believe it, and that's how you actually are living your life, and you can look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I really feel and believe this? You are now in recovery.
Yeah.
Because sobriety and recovery are two completely different things. Sobriety is the ticket to enter recovery. Like you can't have both. You can't not be sober and be in recovery. But once you are sober, then it's now a pursuit of recovery on this path to become, a different, better version of yourself, one that you identify well with, that holds all the values, beliefs, strengths, psychological needs that make up who you want to be as this new person.
Yeah. And definitely tell me if this lands with you, Georgia, a purpose driven life because you can now see what your values are and not a pleasure seeking one. Because those two things to me just they can't exist. Like I can drink and I can chase women, or I can do anything I want, but I can't do both. And I'll take the anything I want every day, all day. And it took me a while to get there, to realize how unappealing and empty the other was.
Yeah. And that's why I think addiction is so uncomfortable for us, psychologically, is because it runs so counter to what our true values really are deep within us.
Hmm.
And whenever we feel, think, and behave in ways that run counter to our values, it's like you're running at cross purposes with yourself. You're running counter to what your fabric really is. And that's why there's guilt and shame, is because, we're acting in ways that run so counter to who we really want to be as
Yeah.
people. And so recovery is great because it allows us to re-identify with our values, our beliefs, our psychological needs, and actually build a life that sits in congruence, in coherence with that underlying fabric, and they fit together well. It builds a strong house because they're not running in conflict with each other. And that's why it feels so good, is because we're in alignment. we're not running at cross purposes with who we are as, down deep as people.
Yes, sir. Um, Last thing I want to ask you about before we jump into the work you're doing and how people can connect with you. Um, God, I forget who actually ran the experiment, but have you heard of Rat Park before?
I have not.
Okay, so what they did was they, had some rats and they put out water, and I believe it had cocaine in it, and so the
Oh, okay.
rats
Yeah.
would kind of hit it,
Yeah. Okay.
and then when they separated, they were going and getting the hits far more frequently. But then
Yeah.
when they took away that, just had regular water and then food, and then had abundance where all the rats could intermingle and have sex and do all this, So essentially, it goes to prove the validity of community um, in sobriety, really. I mean, just in life in general, a prosperous life. What is some of the neuroscience, to your knowledge, behind that, and how important a strong, healthy community, especially one that shares similar, like-minded values, like a 12-step group or something along those lines, towards building new neural pathways?
Yeah. So as we talked about earlier on in the conversation, we're hardwired to want to have social connection. Um, so this is, you know, we're born with certain predispositions genetically and also certain hardwiring. And then we start to have experiences in the world, which add on to those pathways and that initial hardwiring, or it can begin to modify the hardwiring. So, social connection is one of those things that are wired into us to want to receive or participate in because it gives us feel-good chemicals. And so, there's networks of the brain that are all already wired together to give us pleasure when we do those things, and obviously extreme pleasure when we meet our mate and have sex with that mate. But even we feel varying degrees of pleasure when we're just in various types of social engagement. With friends, watching a ball game. I mean, all that feels good, right? You just when you root for a team and you feel like you're part of your city that all rooting for the same team. I mean, that feels good. You feel a commonality and a purpose. That's all hardwired into us. And so, the thing about addiction is it takes us out of that, right? Because nothing's more important than the drug or the drink. And we're severing relationships, we're harming relationships as the addiction progresses. And so not only are we feeling miserable because we're violating our values and we're dealing with withdrawal, but now we don't have any company with anyone because we've scared everyone off, and we're getting the psychological effect of that. That doesn't feel good to be separated from people. And so that's one of the great things about, recovery in groups is that you can now return to people and relationships. And even better yet, you get to return to a tribe of people that have a common interest, and there's really, people that have traveled through this uh, difficult circumstance of addiction have a real bond. I mean, there's just nothing like it. We all know what it feels like. Um, we all know, we know every aspect of it. And so that's a deep shared bond that can really help people in recovery, stay in it, because they're getting feel-good chemicals from it. So your brain is right off the bat in the early stages when it needs all the feel-good chemical it can get because it's dealing with withdrawal and absence of the drug and the alcohol. This is a place where it can begin to feel some good things uh, by feeling like we're in this together. It's not just me, because that aloneness, that isolation is just debilitating.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found it to be critical to my own recovery, I felt good being in rehab, just around those people. And I felt, good being in AA meetings, being around people and feeling like, I was getting sober with other people.
Yeah. Isn't it an interesting thing how we seem to have as humans, we're a creature that We want uniqueness, and yet we don't.
Yeah. Um, yeah, we're complicated and imperfect and constantly evolving. Um, yeah, but we definitely want shared bonds with people, for sure. I mean, there's certain things that we have to have as humans, and that's one of them. And
Yeah.
that's why, like in today's day and age, with the advent of social media and all the rest, and then the pandemic, that's why, there's a case example of the pandemic of why, and social media with people isolating and gaming and all of that, while their mental health issues is because the lack of in-person interaction, the lack of social interaction. It's not the same to interact with somebody through a device as it is, to go out and play in the backyard or, go out and have lunch. Um, when I was growing up, we didn't have any of that, and it was just all playing baseball in the cul-de-sac all day, every day. And now I think that young people have a harder time because they're lacking the social interaction, and I don't think we fully understand the impact of that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I forget who I was talking to, something about, well, his concern was there's the real person, and then there's this online persona, and with young people maybe not being able to differentiate that. I mean, we've seen it with all kinds of horrible things that have come out of it, online bullying and the results of that and everything else that, yeah, it's a real kind of fear that, to, to be able, how important it is to interact with another human. I got challenged by a gentleman. He called it I think it was the 10 shoe challenge or something like that. And my thing that I had to do was I had to, when I was out over the course of a week, I had to compliment 10 men on their shoes. And he goes, here's what the reactions you're going to get. There's going to be people, what the hell? All right, thank you. He's like, you're going to get a couple of them, especially if they're younger guys. You're going to say, hey, man, nice kicks. And you're just walking away, and they're going to be like, who's this, But they're going to look back at you. And the first time a young man had his head down, he had a pair of Jordans on. I was like, oh, man, Jordan 7s or whatever they were, retro. Those are awesome, man. Have a good day. And he just kind of like looked down, turned back, and smiled. And his head was down. I was like, mind blown. That worked. We both got a little dopamine hit off of that. We had a wonderful exchange with the stranger, So it's just we're so fascinating.
Yeah, and think about how good that felt, and then we don't do it. We're scared to do it, or just don't know what the reaction is going to be. And the fact that so many people were surprised that you did that tells you everything you need to know. That's just not how our culture has evolved. And I think women will do that a lot, but we men certainly don't do it. And then the devices only add to the issue because we're just not interacting with people enough, and everybody's walking with their heads down or heads in their phone, and nobody's looking at each other in the eye anymore. And um, I don't know. To me, it's concerning, but I'm an old guy. What do I know?
I finally hit that point myself. Oh, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
George, if somebody wants to reach out to you or an organization and work with you, what's the best way to do so, and what maybe some can they expect in working with you?
Yeah, I have a website, georgehaymaker.com, Haymaker. And there's a link there for a free discovery call where we can talk about what's going on with you or your organization and how I might be able to help. I help organizations with, increasing productivity by helping them understand how the productivity works in the brain. I help people with addiction. I help people that don't have addiction, that have other mental patterns they'd like to work with and try to rewire. I help people with their relationships to stress and burnout. All of these things, anything that involves your mind, has neurologically patterned itself in your brain, and any of it can be reorganized and shifted. It just requires motivation and commitment on the individual's part and the know-how, which is what I help bring, because the brain has very specific ways that it wants to change. So, so yeah, there's a link on there. You can reach out and we can talk for free. Yeah, and I do one-on-one coaching. I do group coaching and training. Um, work with corporations, HR departments, that whole thing.
Awesome. I'll have all those links in the podcast description so you
Cool.
can connect with George there. Any last words of wisdom that you might want to leave, be it with an individual who's maybe early in recovery or their loved ones? A big part of what we do here at Pain is our support system to the families of the suffering addict.
Yeah, just a message of hope and encouragement. I think a lot of times, and I know I certainly did not realize, this thing that's sitting on top of our shoulders. I think a lot of us feel like we're hostage to it, that we kind of have to take what it gives us, and don't even recognize that we have some influence over it. And so that's the first thing, is that no matter how you're stuck, um, the brain is forgiving. It's willing to change if you guide it. It's really our partner. I liken it, here's another analogy for you. I liken it to, maybe all of us feel like we're kind of in this passenger seat of life and our brain is running the show. So it's in the driver's seat and we're just kind of going where it's taking us, dealing with the thoughts and the feelings and the actions that are emerging into it, like we don't have any choice about them. And in reality, we can stop the car, get out of the passenger seat, go to the driver's seat, sit in it, put our hands on the wheel, and ask the brain to get in the passenger seat. And we actually have influence over all of our future thoughts, feelings, and actions if we take the initiative. And so the brain will reorganize itself. It will represent a different way of thinking and feeling for you, but you have to take the first step. You have to be motivated and committed to going through a process of repetition to allow the brain to change effectively, and make the change sustainable and lasting. So many of us start to change and fall out of it because we don't understand. It feels hard, and we don't understand what it takes to get all the way through the process and have it stick. That's what I help do, is guide people in that process. So don't be intimidated by your brain. Know that change is possible. If you ever hear someone say, well, I can't change, or they'll never change, we could and they could if they were so inclined. The brain allows change.
Thank you, Mr. George Haymaker. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And thank you for listening to Pains Don't Hide the Scars podcast. Please give a follow if this is your first time, Apple Podcast, Spotify. And of course, you can always watch Don't Hide the Scars on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Pain Nonprofit.